Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. This is our part 4 of our workforce development webinar series. Today we're going to be talking about employee training and development. If you've joined us for our other parts of this series, welcome back. And if this is your first one, thank you for joining us. My name is Joanna Forbes from Forbes Human Resources, and I want to thank our sponsors today, the Small Business Development Center located at Youngstown State University in the Williamson College of Business Administration. So just some useful information for today's webinar. It will be in a presentation format. Please go ahead and put some questions in the chat box as we go throughout the webinar today, and we will get to those at the end of the webinar. All of the audio should be muted for all of our participants. So if you could just make sure that you're muted, and if you, for some reason, come off, if you could do that so we don't get any feedback. And there's a lot of these slides will have a lot of information on them. I always tell everybody, so don't feel like you need to write everything down. You will have the slides emailed to you today or this week. So this disclaimer for today's webinar, it is for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide legal advice. The information we're going to be talking about today is current as of today's date. So please refer, of course, to all of the referenced websites that you'll see today, and of course, your business industry standards for all current information. So let's go ahead and get started talking about employee training and development. So our agenda for today, for the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to be talking about why is training and development important for my business, some guidelines for effective development programs, the types of employees development, the challenges, the common challenges that we often see at our businesses, some compliance issues that we need to think about, measuring the success of our programs, and then some final reminders and some questions before we leave today. So if you've been to any of my other HR webinars in the past, you know I always start with my two #1 rules, I guess my 1A and my 1B of human resources, and that's to be consistent and to document. So in the world of human resources, and if I have any of my HR friends on the webinar today, I'm sure you'll agree. These are the two things that we always have to remember. When we're making any sort of employment decisions at our workplace, even when it's something about training and development, which we usually don't think about compliance too much when it comes to that, we still have to make sure that we're consistent in our choices and how we roll things out. And we still need to make sure that we're documenting any decisions that we make when it comes to our training and development opportunities that we're providing our staff. So as always, you'll hear me say these two terms as we go out the webinar. So just an introduction today. So employee development has definitely been proven time and time again that it's a strategic tool for our organization. So it's providing growth and opportunity for our staff, but it also adds increased productivity and quality to the organization. So, but before we jump in and we roll out some sort of training and development program, it really is important to make sure that we recognize any challenges and that we don't just do it haphazardly and we have the best practices in mind before we implement it. So, and I always like to say, you know, a lot of our clients at the Small Business Development Center, they are small businesses. And when we think of employee training and development, sometimes we think of large businesses who are rolling out some sort of formal program. And that is not what employee training development has to be. So even our small businesses that are mom and pop shops, our employers and our businesses that have less than maybe 10 employees or 20 employees, there is certainly opportunities for you to still implement some employee training and development, and we'll talk about those today. So just some terms to just keep in mind when we're talking about training and development, learning. So when our staff is learning, they're acquiring the knowledge and the skills and the behaviors and the competencies to do their job or to learn more of their job. Actual training is providing those knowledge, skills, and abilities specific to a particular task. So we think of training, we think if we got a new piece of equipment or if we have a new process or a new software, we'll think of employee training, and that is definitely part of that. And then development digs a little deeper. So development is really more preparing for those future responsibilities. through experiences and relationships, educational courses, and assessments. So that gets a little bit broader and a little bit deeper than maybe just a one-on-one training. So successful employers, they definitely integrate all of those types of training and development opportunities into their overall strategy. So it's very important to make sure that we understand what our organization's overall goals are and that we align those training and development opportunities to reach those goals. So, for example, if your business is taking on a new market, taking on a new product, providing learning opportunities for the employees on that market research or on that data is definitely something that you would want to do. And it's letting that strategic goal drive that development. Another common example that we see a lot is if we have a group of employees that maybe will be retiring within the next year or two. So we really have to think about what are we going to do when we lose these employees and that knowledge that they have, and make that a strategic goal for your training and development program, is transferring that knowledge to the other staff and what we can do. So those are just two very common examples of what we see on a day-to-day basis whenever we're talking about organizational goals aligning with our employee training and development goals. So why is this important? So we know it has been shown time and time again, research has shown time and time again that any business that considers itself a learning organization or offers these opportunities, they attract and retain those valuable employees. Employees want to work for a business that is allowing them to upgrade their skills and to keep them competitive. So that is just one reason. Another reason, of course, is training our current employees, keeping them up on their skills and their knowledge is definitely a better way to go instead of always hiring from the outside. This is definitely a win-win for both our business and our employees. So if there is a new position that you're creating or a new knowledge or ability that somebody needs to know before you can move on to the next strategic goal, look inside and see if somebody there is able to be trained into this position. And it's definitely something that can promote diversity, equity, and inclusion when we encourage the training for all of our employees, for our women employees, our employees of color, different abilities, and different skill levels. So, and the other thing that we see, and we're going to talk about different types of employee training and development today, but it for sure provides that flexibility in your staffing, which definitely has more opportunities for growth for not only your employees, but for your business as well. And when you decide that your business is going to be a learning business and you are going to provide these opportunities for your staff, it allows you to better adapt to the different changing business landscapes that we're seeing out there. It for sure increases our worker productivity. So workers who receive training and educational opportunities are more productive. They feel they're being valued and they appreciate that. And in turn, they are usually more productive for the business. Now, one fear that we see sometimes with businesses, and you may have seen this before at a business that you may have worked for, is that people may be fearful that once they train their employee, that they may leave. And it does happen. It does happen. I will not say that it never happens, but research has shown that overall, when employees are trained and developed at their employer, it actually reduces turnover and absenteeism. It does not lead to them jumping ship for the competitor as often as we think that it might. So just some career development trends that we're seeing right now with employees. And this is just something to keep in mind, again, when you're thinking about developing your staff, is we're seeing a lot of multiple jobs in careers. We all know the days of starting a job and working there for 40 years in that same position. Those days are pretty much over at this point. For some people that's still an option and that still works well for them, but unfortunately, a lot of times that is just not possible. So we're seeing a lot of different multiple jobs, people working one or more jobs at one time, two or more jobs at one time. They're having greater individual responsibility. You might have heard the phrase, the sandwich generation. We have a lot of employees now that are not only taking care of children or grandchildren, but they're also taking care of their parents. So we're seeing a lot of that as well. We're seeing a lot of non-traditional employment. So, what we call gig work, we're seeing a lot of that, a lot of temporary work, a lot of contract work, and contingent work. So there's a lot of different things going on right now with employees that maybe we didn't see, 20 years ago, or of course, even before that. So it's just something, again, to keep in mind whenever we're thinking about developing our own staff. One thing we certainly have to be mindful of is the adult learning principles. So adults do not learn the same as young students or students that are in high school or in elementary school, for sure. Adults have a different way that they take in the knowledge and the way that they want to use the knowledge. So in general, they're self-directed and they have experience to back them up. So when they're learning something new, they're coming from a place of experience and coming from a place of maybe where they have done something like this before. So their viewpoints are going to be a little different than maybe, say, a student who has never done it before. Adults are typically ready to learn and they're more problem focused. How is this development opportunity or how is this training going to help me fix this issue at work? Or how is this going to help me fix the problem of not being able to be promoted, or so on and so forth? Excuse me. And they're definitely more motivated to learn. And they're willing to unlearn to learn. So adults are willing to sometimes, not all, and I know you're probably thinking not all adults are willing to unlearn what they know, but most are willing to unlearn to learn so they can move on and take their new knowledge or their new skill and move it on to their position. So, but the main thing with adults is they want to take what they're learning and use it as fast as they can. They want to take that back to the workplace and utilize it. Adults, we don't learn from reading from a book, taking a test, and then moving on with our life. That's usually not what motivates us to learn. So that's definitely something to keep in mind when you're thinking about your developmental opportunities. So let's talk about some guidelines for effective employee development. So one that is so important is making sure that you have the support of your leadership team. Now, if you're on the webinar today and you are the leadership team, great. That means step one is already done. But it's so important to make sure that whatever you're rolling out, that you have the support of any sort of leadership at your organization. Because again, we have seen where if we don't have the support, it tends to not be a priority and it tends to be the first thing that gets cut. So we want to make sure that everybody understands how this is important and how this is part of the overall organizational strategy and how it fits in. And one thing up there I have is succession process. So this is a huge piece to employee development, and we're going to be talking about succession planning here in a minute. But it's so important to make sure that everybody's on board. And by everybody, I mean number two here, and that's your manager. So if you have managers on staff, you really want to show the connection between why this development opportunity is important and how it's going to be implemented into the workplace. Again, adults, we want to see the connection. If I'm going to go to this class, or if I'm going to shadow somebody, or if I'm going to be cross-trained, I want to see how this is going to be implemented at the workplace. It's also important to understand our employees' interests and needs. Now, oftentimes when we think of training and development, we think of mandatory trainings, things that employees are not interested in, but they have to do. That is definitely one piece of training and development, but that's not the whole piece of training and development. Yes, especially with safety, safety procedures, and in healthcare and manufacturing, there are going to be a lot of things that are mandatory, but that's not really what we're talking about today. So we want to make sure those things are done, of course, but we also want to understand what our employees are interested in. And then, of course, their needs. Not all employees learn the same way, and maybe, frankly, some of them just aren't able to. And we need to understand that before we just roll out a blanket training and development program. And then number 4 is very important, and we're going to circle back to this at the end. What is our desired outcome. Have a clear understanding of exactly what skill, what ability, or what knowledge that you want learned by this development initiative. If we don't know what the end goal is, there is no way to measure it, and there is no way to see if it was successful. So we definitely want to make sure that we know what the desired outcome of the opportunity is. So one thing that's very important is relating the development to the performance. So we want to talk about communication, which we're going to talk about in a minute, but you want to communicate to your employees how this development opportunity will contribute to their goals and their organizational goals. Again, as adults, we want to know, how does this connect? Is this just something you're making me do, or is this going nowhere? No, we want to show them exactly how this is going to lead to other things. It's also important to make sure that you differentiate between career development plans for the employee and skill building for immediate performance deficiencies. So again, when we're talking about training and development, we're usually not talking about deficiencies. Now we can, and that's definitely an important area that we need to address, but that is not the only reason why we should roll out training and development for our staff is when we see deficiencies. Because again, then we're only showing we just value you when maybe you're struggling a little bit, and that is not the culture of learning at a business. So yes, is it necessary sometimes to roll out things to address those deficiencies, but that's not the only reason why you want to make sure you have training and development. And if that is, then maybe you just want to take a step back and check and see where can we roll it out differently. So with that being said, it's very important to make sure that each opportunity or program that we have is appropriate for the phase of the performance management process. And by the performance management process, I mean, are we addressing deficiencies? Are we noticing a leader at our organization that we want to help grow? Or is this somebody who wants to learn a completely different skill in a different position? So there are definitely different areas in the performance management process that we want to make sure that we're addressing the right way. So let's talk about some employee development methods. So the most common methods are the three that we're seeing on the screen right now. And that's on the job with a manager or a fellow coworker that has a lot of wealth of experience, and they'll lead that development activity right there in the context of the actual work environment. So, and we'll talk about examples of that. So that's a very common one. And again, that does not need to be a huge business with different layers of management and staff. That can be a very small business that can still do this very successfully. And a lot of times we have our training opportunities at training facilities. So we'll send staff off-site or go to other locations. That's another very common way to have a training and development opportunity. And then of course there's online methods, what we're doing today. And then also the online methods, if you've ever heard of learning management systems, there are a lot of companies out there that's what they do. They house different training programs that employees can do whenever they have the opportunity to do them. So those are our three most common types of training and development opportunities. So just some different delivery approaches, and we're not taking a test at the end of this webinar or anything, so I don't want to get too in the weeds with the academics, but I do want to just make sure that we understand that there are different ways to do these. So if we have 20,000 employees, 10,000 employees, or if we have 5 employees, there are all different ways to do these types of things. So self-directed, those are typically those online when they can do them. We have instructor-led, we have on the job, and then we have blended. And the reason, again, why I want to point these out is because if we think back to a few minutes ago when we were talking about our employees' needs, we have to make sure that we understand that, because not all employees will thrive sitting in a classroom. Not all of them will thrive being shown on the job and then expected to do it right away. Everybody has different needs, and it is important to recognize that. So one way that we can do employee training development is a very common basic approach. And I always say that all managers are coaches, or at least all successful managers are coaches. We usually don't think of coaching as a training and development tool, but it certainly is. It's the most cost-effective one, and it should be happening really, every day and all the time. So what coaching is, it's a manager or more experienced or skilled coworker who gives that employee advice or guidance and helps them along, with their skills, helps them improve their performance, and helps them enhance their quality of their career. So good managers are also good coaches. A lot of times it's personalized and customized. It could happen, it's definitely usually one-on-one. It could be over a period of time. It could be simply stopping by the person's desk or by the machine that they work at and giving them, information and advice and guidance that day. But coaching is happening all the time. So, but it's important to make sure that the coach or the manager knows that that's part of their job and that that's what they're doing. Because a lot of times what happens is if we have an employee that's struggling, we don't document that we've had these conversations. And a lot of times it's important to do that. So while coaching can be informal, it does turn formal at times, and that's okay. That's definitely fine and something that you can do. And this is definitely something that is inexpensive that I would say start right off the bat with this. The other thing that we see is mentoring. So mentoring matches our less experienced employees with our more experienced employees. Again, this can be formal or informal. But we want to make sure that we have people matched up based on their skills and their developmental needs. And we want to make sure that if we have goals that we're tracking them. Again, there's our documentation. And again, we want to make sure that the mentor is on board, wants to do this, is not doing it because they have to. They're doing it willingly. They're doing it because they want to. And we're holding both parties accountable. So if you are going to roll out some sort of formal or even maybe a half informal mentor program, you want to make sure that it's being seen through and it's actually happening. That we're not just slapping these labels on people and then hoping for the best. So again, we're linking it to the business strategy and the goals. If we're going to take time to put these types of programs in, we want to make sure that we're doing them thoroughly and correctly. And then this is a very common one that you may have seen in your workplace, and these are individual development plans or IDPs. So this is a document that details an employee's intentions and their learning outcomes, and any sort of support they need to reach those goals. So you would have the employee's information, what their goals are, and how they're going to pursue them, and outline those expectations. So let's just look a little bit in the more specifics about this. So again, if you had an employee, maybe somebody who is showing some leadership ability and you want them to go to the next step, this is definitely a way to do that, to make sure that everybody's staying on track and it's not getting lost. We all know how fast time goes. Before you know it, maybe another year has gone past and you have not reached out to this star employee to really show them how much you value them and you value their career. And then sometimes we wait too long and it's too late and the person is gone. So if you're thinking of doing this with a star or somebody who's showing some leadership ability at your place of work, go ahead and do this. Again, this does not have to be a lengthy document. You're going to include their information, some development objectives, how they're going to get there, and what those outcomes are. And really, again, it's most effective when it's aligned with some organizational needs, when there's some objective, accurate information on there. Maybe you will attend this class by, you will shadow this person, such and so is going to be your mentor, you will perform these activities, cross-train, et cetera, which we're going to talk about all those things here in a minute. So we really want to make sure that it has some specific information in there and that it's showing the employee that you're committed to their learning and development, which is very important. So cross-training, I mentioned cross-training. Again, very common in the workplace. That's where we're training our employees to perform job duties other than what they're typically assigned for. We know this provides flexibility in the workplace. So if somebody is going to be off, that we can maybe have another employee cover while you're also enhancing their skill set. This is something that usually doesn't result in some sort of immediate promotion or advancement, but it certainly helps if an opportunity does pop up and they've been cross-trained in parts or all of the job. And this is usually definitely more efficient than bringing in, again, more new hires. You know, we're showing our staff we value them and we are training them in other positions. And employees will typically appreciate it. I say typically because we all know there's always some employees who have, you know, do not have interest in maybe learning something new. And that's okay if it's okay for you, if that works for your business. But many employees do appreciate cross-training because they can broaden their skills and learn something new. So just some basic steps for cross-training, because it sounds simple. And again, these 5 steps you see on here can really happen in about 5 minutes, but you want to make sure that you're doing your due diligence. So you want to identify what knowledge and skill that you need for each position, particularly the position that they're being cross-trained on. You want to compare those skills with your current employees. And then identify what employees are capable of being the trainers. As we all know, not all employees are trainers. Some prefer it and some do not. And you want to match them up and then make sure you schedule those times for doing it and plan for the budget. And the reason why I like to remind to plan for the budget, because if somebody's being cross-trained, then that person's position then would need filled for that shift for sure. So again, this could be something that happens in 5 minutes, and that's okay, but you really want to think it through. And again, you're going to make sure that you have some specific times in there. You know, you will cross-train with this position, with this person for 10 hours over the next 2 weeks or something like that. It is so specific because that's really the best way to check to see if it actually happened. And again, there's your documentation. You want to have that documented. You may have heard the term stretch assignments. This kind of goes a little bit hand in hand with cross-training, but it really just gives employees this opportunity to kind of go a little above and beyond what their typical job duties are. It allows them to literally stretch their legs a little bit, maybe develop some new skills. If they come to you, they're not being challenged anymore. They want to be challenged. This is the best way to do that. And research, again, has shown time and time again that when leaders are given some sort of stretch assignment, that they really become more successful whenever they're doing something like that. So this is a great way to kind of test an employee to see if maybe they're ready to move on. Again, if they're totally succeeding at their job and they want challenged a little bit, this is a great way to do that. So let's talk about these 2 terms. You may have heard these before, job enlargement and job enrichment. So job enlargement is simply when we expand the employee's job by adding more tasks and duties, and it's usually at the same level of complexity. So is that training and development? Is that a developmental opportunity? Not really. That's more trying to get more bang for our buck. However, job enrichment is when we build more depth to an employee, so they maybe have more control, more responsibility, and more discretion over the choices that they make and part of the job process. So there's my warning down there in red. So when we have jobs that are enlarged but not enriched, employees will not typically be motivated successfully. So, and you may have seen this and you may have been a person that has been in this position before. If you're just simply giving more tasks that are at the same level, similar to what the employee's been already doing, they're typically not going to be motivated. What motivates employees are having that higher level of responsibility, being able to maybe make more decisions on their own and having some more control. That's what's going to motivate your employees. So these go hand in hand for sure. You do not want to do job enlargement without job enrichment and expect your employees to really be motivated. That's usually not how it works. Now, That being said, sometimes job enlargement happens because we have no control over it. We're losing staff, other people are picking up other tasks, and that's perfectly fine. But as an employee developmental tool, that's not the way that you would want to go. And job shadowing is definitely another, again, small businesses can do this. This does not have to be a formal process. It really gives employees a great way to see other positions that are at their place of employment. And that can help in planning what their developmental plans are. A lot of times people will shadow something they thought that they were interested in. And then after spending a couple shifts with somebody, they say, nope, that was not for me. Or maybe they learned something new that made them more interested in it. It's also a great way for employees to see different perspectives from other positions at their organization. So they know what those other folks, what their challenges are, and to see their perspective, especially for those departments that maybe work together, but you're not really sure what happens when it gets to them. It's definitely a great way to see how your decisions and your work impacts other parts of the business. I always recommend job shadowing as a teamwork activity as well at businesses. It's really a great way to see how a team flows. So succession planning, we could talk about this for a very long time, but for today, we're just going to talk about the basics of succession planning. And that's really when you're identifying those long range needs of what kind of talent we need to meet those needs. So a lot of times this is if you have somebody in a critical position at your place of work who is retiring or leaving at some point. And you will then focus on who we can maybe see internally that would be able to take on that role. So again, this is not just for large organizations with complex systems. This is definitely something that smaller organizations could benefit from as well and really should think about. Another thing we see is corporate universities. Now, for my small businesses on the call today, this is not something that you would typically have. This is something you would see, of course, larger organizations that have many employees. But really, the other piece to this is, again, I mentioned learning management systems because there are companies out there that smaller businesses can partner with and use their learning and development opportunities that they have in line. But the good thing about these types of systems is it really gives a consistent and uniform message to all the learners. And usually the focus is on the learning that will benefit the organization. So, and as you see in the first bullet, a lot of times if there's proprietary knowledge and branding, that type of information will be on there. But it also shows that you're committed to learning and growth. For those of you on the call today who have to do maybe annual mandatory trainings, especially if we work in healthcare, again, or manufacturing with safety, bloodborne pathogens, slip, trip, and fall trainings, those types of things that we have to look at every year. A lot of times those will be those online trainings that we can look at our own time. So, and then we do have our online employee development. Of course, this is becoming more common. Sending employees away to trainings is definitely more expensive. Online is definitely less expensive and a more simpler way to go. And it does allow for that self-directed, on-demand instruction. And it allows that flexibility. So if you have staff that are on all shifts, this is a great way to make sure they're getting all of those required and mandatory trainings that they need. But again, when we think about employee development, we don't just want to think about that. So it's also a great way for those second shift or third shift employees to get some other trainings that may benefit them. So just some best practices for that. It really needs to be in small, easily understood pieces. It's really hard to sit in front of a computer for hours and hours and listen to a video and then try to retain any of that information. You want to connect it for the employees to make sure they're going to do their job better. You want to make sure the topics are definitely specific to your business goals. And then these last two things are more logistical things that I always like to remind businesses of. is giving some sort of introductory training so those employees know how to use it, especially for those employees who may be doing it when there isn't anybody else around. And then the last thing is, how will they contact somebody if they're having technical issues, or how can they get the information that was just shown to them? So we want to make sure that they're not just kind of out there on their own without any way to make sure they know how to do these types of things. Even just the basic, how do I turn this on and how do I, move forward? We want to make sure that everybody, nobody's intimidated by this process. Not all employees are computer savvy, and then there's an ease of use for everybody. So let's talk about some challenges that we see. Just some common issues that arise whenever we roll out any sort of training and development opportunity like the ones that we talked about today. Definitely funding problems, which, for a lot of small businesses with lack of, smaller resources, that's an issue. Lack of, was it even, worth it? It's hard for us to measure. And then, of course, generational differences and different knowledge and skill abilities for our staff, which I just talked about. So some general issues that we see is definitely lack of accountability. So you want to make sure, again, all of the stakeholders that I have mentioned over the last half hour, that everybody is on board. And because of that, we sometimes lead into inconsistent execution. So if you took the time to get these fundamental processes in place, or if you took the time to maybe purchase some sort of learning management system or partner with one, or to roll out a workforce plan or succession plan, you want to make sure that you're using it and you're using them consistently for everyone and for all of your developmental opportunities for sure. The last thing you want to do is to spend a lot of time creating something, rolling something out, and then not using it. And then, of course, few employers really track the metrics that really matter, such as, whether or not it was even effective. So let's just talk about that for a minute. We'll circle back to that. So for funding challenges, again, many grants are available for different sort of developmental opportunities and workforce initiatives. Organizations such as the Small Business Development Center, a little plug, that is definitely opportunities to have some learning and development opportunities. And then really making sure that you prioritize what's important. Don't just roll out a training program or start matching up mentors and mentees or start cross-training just because you feel like you have to. Make sure that it really is working for your organization. And we're seeing a lot of businesses now, they cut travel costs. They're doing some scheduling so it doesn't really impact the working hours. And we're doing more of these low cost or initiatives at the work, like we talked about, like mentoring, coaching, and job shadowing. All of those things are developmental opportunities. Don't always think that they're not worth it because they're not some fancy, learning program. That is not true. They are just as important. So let's talk a little bit about our generational differences, best practices. I'm using the term younger and older very loosely here, but it's just to give us an idea. So how about less experienced and more experienced? Maybe that would have been better. But just, again, we have to recognize the interests and the needs of our employees before we roll something out. So our younger generations, they really, that sink or swim approach just does not really work for those generations. So they like well-defined assignments, clear benchmarks, and they like that continuous feedback. So you really want to make sure that any training accommodates that collaborative work style of our younger generations. And then maybe our more seasoned generations, they typically like more of a step-by-step approach. They do like their handouts. They like something that they can review on their own, and they like opportunities for practice. So just a little bit different there. These are general, and these are not all inclusive, of course. We know there's exceptions to all of these types of things. But again, I just want you to be mindful that everybody learns differently, and we can't expect everybody to be motivated and to learn the same way. And it's very important, if you're going to roll out anything, that you have a clear communication about what is happening. So we do not want to make sure we're creating any sort of unrealistic expectations or any confusion about who is going to be receiving these developmental opportunities. Communication is key in management in general, as we know, and it's definitely key when it comes to rolling out any sort of developmental opportunities. So be clear about the expectations of what happens if anybody completes any sort of development or opportunity. You really don't want to suggest that there'll be a promotion at the end, that maybe their job will change, that maybe they'll get a pay increase of some sort. We don't want to suggest any of that because, as we know, if employees are thinking about that and think it might happen, they may be very disappointed if it doesn't, and then all of that developmental opportunity work was for naught because now they're not motivated and they're not feeling valued. So you want to be very transparent about what will happen at the end of this opportunity. And then you want to make sure, that the reason for the opportunity is understood. Is it to grow the employee? Or are we assisting in areas of deficiency? So we want to kind of make sure that everybody is on board with why we're doing it. So again, and I just want to point out the third bullet there. When we talk about mandatory learning and development opportunities, that's a little bit different than learning and development programs that we are typically rolling out. So we want to make sure does this affect their employment? Does this affect their performance evaluation, or for those appraisals and for those employees that maybe opt out, that they don't want to do anything like this? It is important to make sure we emphasize why it's important. But if there's going to be any sort of ramifications, we want to make sure, again, that is clearly communicated to the employees and documented, and that we're consistent with those ramifications for sure. So for compliance sake, we might not think of training and development as something that we need to be compliant about, but we just want to make sure that everybody, again, has the same opportunities. A lot of times employees on a second shift or a third shift feel like maybe they're slighted. So are these opportunities only available, during the day? So let's think about that. Let's think about if an employee engages in an activity that's protected by the law and then they're denied any sort of development opportunity. Could there be some sort of retaliation? It looks like retaliation. So a very common one is if we have an employee that goes out on any sort of leave of absence, and then when they come back, they're not offered the same opportunities. And again, the pay. I get this question a lot. So do we have to pay our employees to be trained? So this is a very short answer, but there are, this can get a little deeper, but the Fair Labor Standards Act definitely requires employers pay their non-exempt. So we're talking about non-management, non-salaried staff for any hours that they work. We know that. So when is training and development opportunities considered work? So training time is considered work when the non-exempt employee is doing it because it is part of their job and it benefits their employer. It's not considered work if they're doing it voluntarily. It's something that they're doing on their own time. It's not required for their business at all, for their job, and it really doesn't have much impact on their job. It's more of a personal opportunity of growth. So that is when it can't be paid. If you're ever unclear about that, of course, always err on the side of caution and pay the employee. But if an employee comes to you and says, hey, I'm starting to take classes on XYZ, and they went on their own to do it, and then says, will you pay me for that? The answer is typically no if the conversation starts that way. Make sure all of your technology is up to date. Make sure you have your adequate technology. Check everything before we go on. Again, make sure there's directions for those employees who maybe aren't that computer savvy. If you invest in technology, I see this sometimes, we invest in software, we invest in a learning management system, but then we just take the time not to learn it or not to use it. So make sure you're using it if you're making those investments, and make sure you're keeping them updated. for any sort of updates and any maintenance for that technology for sure. Again, we don't just want to throw money away, make some big investment, and then never use it and not keep it updated. And of course, it's at the end of all of this, all of those opportunities that we just talked about, all of those different types of training and development opportunities, we want to make sure that we can measure the success. So this is such a critical component. Did the employees learn, and can they transfer that knowledge, that skill, that ability to their work performance? So again, I promised I would circle back to this. Think back to that original goal that you set in the beginning of creating this developmental program or this opportunity. Did you reach it? So we typically say, well, how do we measure that? Well, the very first one would, of course, would be observation. Did you see the employee utilize this skill, this knowledge, this ability when they went back to the workplace? But other areas that we can definitely measure the opportunity was the reaction. Did the employees enjoy it? Did they appreciate it? Was it worthwhile? Did they learn? What was their behavior on the job after? And by behavior, I mean, did they utilize the skills that they learned? Were business results? Are we better now that we cross-trained? And then, so that is definitely our return on investment. So if we roll out a safety developmental opportunity, did injuries go down? So that's a common, return on investment, things like that. Did turnover reduce? That's definitely a common way to look to see if something was valuable. So again, we want to make sure that we have a goal. If we don't have a goal in the beginning, then there really isn't a way to measure if it worked. So some final reminders before we go today, and to see if we have any questions. Start small. Don't be overwhelmed. Employee developmental programs do not have to be elaborate. Some of those quick basic ones that we talked about today, you can take right back to the workplace today and implement. Document your developmental programs and your decision choices. So document who you chose to do what developmental program, whether it was cross-training, whether it was a class, whether it was shadowing, whether it was a mentoring opportunity, whatever it was, document your decisions for the employees that you chose. Definitely make sure you're communicating the program and the opportunities thoroughly, making sure everybody understands from all the stakeholders of what page we're on and where we're going with this. And then, of course, again, measure your success. Was the developmental opportunity worth the time, worth the resources, and worth the effort? What should we change? If we're going to roll this out again, if we're going to do this again, what should we change? So, and I'm going to throw back to Jenna to see if we have any questions in the chat box. And again, if anybody has any questions for us moving forward, you can always reach out to us directly. So Jenna, did we have anything?
Hi, Joanna. So we did have a couple questions in here. It says, how do I form a mentorship program at my company? If I'm a small business and just looking where to start, what can I do?
Well, the first thing that you want to do is definitely identify who at your business would be a successful mentor, just based on what you know already. And then whenever you're looking for a mentee, it's somebody who you see leadership ability in. And by leadership, I don't mean everybody out there needs to be an executive. Not everybody is striving to be the CEO. This could just be from one position to another. So you want to look for those employees who they're engaged, they're genuinely interested in the business. And then you want to make sure that you match them up with somebody whose personalities you think are compatible as well. And that mentor is definitely somebody that you see has the time, has the patience, and enjoys working with employees at different skill levels, for sure.
Okay. And then another one we have is, how often should I offer employee development programming to my employees?
So there really isn't a right or wrong answer on this. And as you can see, there are all over the map. You can do developmental opportunities. So this is something that really should be going on, 365. So I wouldn't want someone to think, okay, every July I have to think about, what developmental opportunities to roll out. Think of it more as that your business has that culture of learning. So if you see, again, an opportunity where somebody is maybe showing leadership ability, say, okay, there we go. This person's maybe shining a little bit. They're asking questions. They're genuinely interested in the business. Maybe they would benefit from this class, or being a mentee to this person, or maybe cross training with me a little bit as the leader of the organization. So try to think of it as something that's ongoing. I know that's kind of that's not like a good answer, because we want to say, oh, maybe 2 times a year or something like that. But it really should be something that's ongoing. But for some basic classes, and if you want to start small and say, okay, I'm just going to start looking for some webinars, there's nothing wrong with that at all. And I would say if you could at least do that a few times a year, you're on the right path. But I would try to incorporate some of those other things as well that can be like an ongoing piece to that.
Okay. And then we also have, it says, can I use employee development and training as a way to attract new hires?
I certainly think you can. And again, if you're having during your interviews or on your website or anywhere where you have your information posted of your available jobs, that's what you would want to have in there. We support employee development. We support learning and growing our employees. We offer learning and developmental opportunities. Those are just some sentences that you would want to have on your website, in your job ads, talk about it during your interviews. And that's definitely a way to attract employees. They want to know that when they come in there, they're going to be valued and they're going to be recognized for their contributions.
And then the last question we have currently is, how long should training last for new and experienced employees? Should it be 1 day? Should it cover multiple days? What's your thoughts and opinions on this?
Well, definitely all over the map. So in terms of how long should it last, it really depends on what it is that you're rolling out. So yeah, let's see. If we have an example of, say we are learning supervisory skills for maybe a new manager or something like that. I would say a good way to maybe like kickstart something like that would be to maybe have that employee attend some sort of class or workshop, or immediately start shadowing or a current manager, and then putting them on some sort of individual developmental program like we talked about. And that could be something that may take a full year, for something like that. Now, and you would have dates, by this date you're going to shadow, by this date you're going to attend this class, by this date you're going to, et cetera, et cetera. If it's a one-time thing, say you got a new piece of machinery, say there's a new software coming out, that could be something that's just a one-time deal, and then a refresher maybe once a year moving forward. So that can definitely be something that is all over the place. For succession planning, a lot of times that's at the minimum a year. If you have somebody that's going to be moving into a leadership role because somebody's retiring, for example, that's usually at least a year up to 3 years. So it's really all over the place in terms of time and length.
Okay, great. Currently that's all we have in the Q&A, and we could probably hang around here for a couple more minutes and see if anybody else had any more questions.
For sure. And this is our contact information on the screen right now. Pat is our director at the SBDC. Please reach out if you have any questions about our services there. And then that is my direct contact information on the right. If you have any questions about today or anything HR related for that matter, you can always reach out to me.
And we just had another one pop up in the chat, and it says, if you have a formalized training program in place for a new hire, should you contact them before they start and ask them how they want to learn and modify your training, if they have a specific preference in learning?
Can you read the beginning of that again, Jenna?
Sure. So if you have a formalized training program in place for a new hire, should you contact the new hire before they start and ask them the best way they learn, and modify your training program to meet their needs?
Okay. So this sounds to me like this maybe is a training program that a new employee would go through once they start. Like that's maybe part of the orientation period. So if I'm assuming that correctly. So one thing to do, and there's kind of two pieces to this, and I don't want to get too much in the weeds about the ADA or the Americans with Disabilities Act. But one piece is to always say, here is the training. Would you need any accommodations or anything of that nature? That's kind of a common question, but that's not what this person's asking. I know that, but I just wanted to make sure that I threw that out there so everybody understood that that's part of that piece as well. But what you could do is have a conversation and just say, here's the training, it's online. Part of it's online, part of it's this, part of it's that. Do you have any questions about that? What do you think that you would be able to, are you able to do all of those things? Do you see any issues with that? And go from there. The reality is we can't change a formal training program for every employee, but we should be able to change small aspects for it. And an example would be online for sure. So if there is something that's an online program that maybe your non-computer savvy employees would have to do, I would definitely have a way for them to do it so they either can do it the old-fashioned way, or it is very outlined for them exactly what they have to push, on the computer to get to the next steps and to go through the motions of the program. So yeah, it's worth a conversation and to see if anything comes up in that conversation. If you have, I mean, I know it seems hard to believe anymore that there's employees out there who can't use computers or aren't computer savvy, but the reality is that it still is. So you want to make sure that you have some alternative methods for something like that. But I wouldn't say that you need to change a formal program for everybody. I don't, that's not really what you would need to do, is to really spend a lot of resources changing for every person. That wouldn't be, a good use of your resources.
Well, if that concludes our Q&A and chat section there, if anybody has any additional questions, we'll be sending up a follow-up email by the end of this week with the recording along with the slide deck, and we'll also have Joanna's contact information as well as our contact information here at the SBDC. And Joanna, thank you so much for joining us today. And as always, we look forward to working with you. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, bye everybody.